ClimateAction.tech is a community of tech professionals with the goal of inspiring and empowering each other to take climate action. And we run these calls to share ideas and facilitate conversation within the community. And we have an Eastern-friendly and a Western-friendly option, which are running bi-weekly. Today's speaker is Nishul Saperia. And Saperia. There we go. Yeah. And he's a member of the founding team of Markit, which is a fintech startup that is now listed in NASDAQ. And he's now a mentor and investor and advisor across the startup spectrum. And he's going to talk about how to decide whether to push forward with your climate project and what makes a climate project impactful and useful. Yeah, and with all of that, over to you.
Great, thank you. So you know a little bit about my background. I've been working on commercial startups, which not say social or climate related for a while. So I'm kind of new to this space, but recently I decided I wanted to work on things which were not just commercial ventures. And in particular, climate change came across my, was one of the things which I definitely thought was an area of interest for me, mainly because I'm a scuba diver, and I was really sad to see the damage being done to to coral reefs across the world. And it's extra sad to see that the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees actually means still a huge amount of the coral reefs are still going to be damaged. But still wanted to try and find a way to have some positive impact in this space. But I think still while also doing something which has some kind of commercial bent. And so I was thinking, what are the various things which, what are some of the ways which I could have an impact here, right? And just like I think a lot of people, I have an appreciation of what people might care about as a consumer, because we're all consumers, right? And so that actually naturally often becomes the first port of call for a founder who isn't actually going to work on an area where they're currently already in. And I had a few thoughts around particularly people's carbon footprints, which, having gone through this, I've realized is not something particular. I didn't have particularly unique insights. I mean, they were like that people were turned off by the topic for various reasons. They felt guilty. That my thought was that people don't necessarily know what to do. So I'm not so sure that's the case if they've actually invested a little bit of time at least to look into it. That also we need to make people feel positive about the space. So I started looking at the possibility of a carbon footprint tracker. And you know, as obviously my background is very commercial, so I came into it with a very commercial startup mentality. And when I do that, when I look at new ventures, especially as an investor or advisor, but I think it's even more important as a founder, is asking the question: does anyone actually want this? Am I building something that people are going to use? And so I took this mindset into my last idea, which is just really, as I mentioned, a carbon footprint tracker to help people understand and then also incentivize them to reduce their carbon footprint. I mean, as a quick description of the product I kind of conceptualize is an app which would live on your phone with minimal input from you, sucking data from all over the place, like your energy bills, your shopping bills, and your email, for example, capture information about your flights, and then calculate carbon footprint, and then use a variety of things like behavioral psychology and nudges to try and help you not just learn what to do, but also be incentivized to reduce it. And in particular, I knew that people weren't just going to do it just from out of goodwill necessarily. So I would thought about things like how I would build potentially a wildlife model where I could link a ton of carbon to wildlife saved. And I had this thought where there's 3 billion fish on the planet. There's an estimate apparently. And I came up with a number which suggested that we could all save 80 fish each, right? Just by reducing our carbon footprint a reasonable amount within 1 year, which I thought, oh, that's great, right? Until I realized that we actually kill 2.4 billion fish, we reckon, from fishing alone each year. So the turnover is so high. I mean, that number just doesn't seem like that useful. But then also I spoke to a few brands and thought they're all trying to present themselves as more sustainable, and a great win for them is to offer rewards and incentives to people who are reducing their carbon footprint. And it shows, and it paints them in a good light and shows their commitment to helping people to reduce their carbon footprint. So these are the thoughts I had in my head, but at the end of the day, I think those were interesting, but I do believe very much at the end of, when you're doing a startup, you've got to be asking yourself sorry, a car is going past. I don't know if it's too noisy. You've got to be asking yourself the hard, scary questions, which literally scare the shit out of you when you think, okay, I want to do this, but oh my God, if the answer to this question turns out not the way I like it, then oh my God, then I might not actually, I should be doing this, right? And I think it's very natural to actually avoid those questions. It's scary to think people don't want your product. I mean, people's egos get invested into their idea. Definitely my ego gets invested in the ideas I have, right? And especially when people tell you, oh, that's a good idea, then you get more excited about it, right? And the more you work on it, the more attached you get to it. And then especially once you start telling people about them, about the idea and that you're working on it, then it now becomes slightly public that if you decide not to do it, it's can often feel like a public failure. And I think actually letting go of this is one of the best things you can do. It's definitely one of the things I've tried to get my mindset around, because I realized that means you don't talk to people about it enough, and that means you're not going to go and find out whether people want it. So in terms of what the best ways to find out as efficiently as possible if people really want what you're going to build, right? Obviously, a key ways to do that is to talk to people. But how you talk to people is something that you really do need to be careful about, because often you'll ask people, oh, if I build this, would you use it? And a lot of people, when there's no investment necessary to say yes, they'll say yes, right? It's very easily done, and people are often just thinking conceptually. I think when you put something in front of someone, so do you want to pay £5 for this now? That's a very different question, right? Then people really engage their brain, whether they're actually going to use something. But before you can actually go and do that, obviously you need a product to show them, right? And you want to go and speak to them, and instead of asking them what it is that they might want, I think the best thing is to focus on what they're already doing, right? Now, so I went and spoke to a bunch of people, and one of the main questions I asked was, have you ever measured your carbon footprint? And one thing that was quite clear actually is that there's a lot of people who I spoke to who are passionate about sustainability and about climate change, and invested a lot of time and effort in reorienting their life around reducing their carbon footprint, weren't actually measuring it. And you know, when I saw people who are passionate about sustainability weren't doing this and why, I realized my fundamental premise had a problem. And if people aren't going off to measure it just as a one-off, what is the likelihood people are going to go and download an app to do it on a daily basis? I was starting to question. So I'd spoken to about 25, 30 people, and I spoke to them for like 30, 60 minutes each, right? There's a bunch of other things I would ask them, but this was the fundamental key question, which I knew I needed to figure out. And after like that many people, I could start seeing trends. I then did a survey, literally 3 questions. It was a 3-question survey, and one of them was obviously, have you ever measured your carbon footprint? And the options would be never, once, sometimes done it, and then the last one is I do it regularly to actually see how my footprint has changed, because I needed to see actually that people were doing that. And after doing that survey, I could see clearly that I was not onto something that people really wanted. The other major question I had in my head, which just scared me, was the fact that, do you need an app for this, right, to make changes? Because an app has a lot of friction before it gets used. People need to hear about it, then they need to think, okay, I want to go and explore it. Then they go to the app store, they look at it, then they think, do I actually download it? And then even once they've downloaded it, you've got to activate them and get them to use it, right? I mean, I'm sure many of you might have actually downloaded apps in the past, and then it sits there on your phone for months and you forgot you've even downloaded it, right? And so there's a lot of friction around getting people to use apps, and app developers and app sellers, they lose people along the whole way. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the funnel. And you know, I also think about my own experience. I think using a web page to actually learn about this is just it's a very low commitment thing. You go into Google, type, how do I reduce my carbon footprint, right? You don't need an app to do that. So I started to get skeptical about the app side of it, and just thought, you know, an app's not necessary. On this note, I also recommend reading the Mum Test. I don't know if you've heard this book. It's actually spelled MOM. Great book. It's very funny. It's actually entertaining. I don't know how funny it is, but it's very entertaining read, and it's short and really punchy, and it's by a guy who I would say is a Bible. This book is a Bible around doing customer development. I think another key question to ask, and it's funny, I think a lot of people don't necessarily really ask themselves this when they're doing something, is this something you yourself would use? You get an idea, you get excited about the idea, and I know this happened to me. I got excited about the idea, and I was talking to people about the idea, and we come in all these lots of different ideas about things, and it actually there was a moment when I stopped for a second. I thought, oh my God, this is actually really intimidating what I want to build here now. And I thought, I should really invest more time in trying out the apps that would exist out there to see what the experience is like, right? And I actually hadn't done this at that point. And I went and downloaded the apps, and I talked about this in the blog post. I don't know if many of you people have read it, but I found it actually uninspiring, unengaging experience. And in particular, I realized that daily basis carbon tracking isn't actually that insightful, because a lot of what you do changes on a daily basis, but also you have big ticket items like taking a flight. How many flights you take? You're not taking flights every day. So working out your average footprint on a daily basis is actually kind of skewed on the days when you might go somewhere, right? Because not everyone's going to stop flying. So that was one of the other things which I think definitely helped make me think a bit more deeply about this. I think, so I got to this point where I'm going to kill this, but I think it's one other thing I should mention is that this customer development process is a really important process to do, even if you end up not killing the idea, because a lot of startups end up, I'm sure you've heard of the term pivot into doing something different. After thinking they're going to do A, they're going to B. And the only way that happens is because they go out to customers and they have a lot of conversations, or they create at least a minimal viable product or whatever. And they realize that what customers, from that experience, that what customers want is something different than what they built, right? Or what they're offering. So I would say, just because you might not necessarily get great initial feedback, it's definitely it's a very worthwhile process in of itself. I mean, in this case, what I came to realize was that what people, I definitely felt like I understood the mindset of what people want after a while. And it was, what people want is just to feel that, remove the guilt that they might themselves feel about their own impact, right? And so it's getting to the emotions of what people have is actually really important, because that's actually what drives their decisions. And it hit me that, oh yeah, that's why a lot of companies are out there trying to offer carbon offsets, because that's actually for 15, some of them are, I can see some of them are saying for £5 a month you can offset your carbon footprint. Hey, £5 a month, remove your guilt, don't feel guilty anymore, you're not causing any more damage yourself as a person. And then I looked into that, but from reading into it, I don't feel convinced by what I'm seeing in the carbon offset industry that is actually offering, that's effective, right? I think there's a lot of challenges around offsets. I'm sure everyone on this call probably might be familiar with some of them. It's, you can build a forest, but who's maintaining it, right? This challenge, it also has problems on biodiversity. I mean, Rolof's on the call, he knows probably as much as anyone about this stuff. And also, I didn't want to offer a product which would actually just allow people to buy their guilt away, right? I wanted to actually help people reduce their carbon footprint. So in the end, I decided not to go that way. And then finally, of course, actually, I saw not only there's a lot of companies doing carbon footprint trackers, there's a lot of companies doing offsets, right? So I thought this is a competitive space. So I kind of ended up deciding not to go in this direction. And then, I mean, my final thought is that I think getting people to change via apps and software is often a very difficult proposition. People think that you can create an app or a website and you can get people to change. I think it's very challenging. And actually, what I think is the things that are going to really change things, firstly, information, and I think you talked about the greening of the websites. That, I mean, that raises awareness, but also, I think, is it Chris who's built the website which allows you to find out if a website is green or not, right? So there's tools to provide information, but also I think really important is building products which create alternatives to what people do today that reduces their carbon footprint, but also still gives them what they're looking for, right? I think, and so, I mean, really simple example of that is just protein alternatives, energy alternatives. And I think that's where you can really have an impact, because you know that you're actually creating something that people are really going to go and use, reduce their carbon footprint, rather than trying to push people up a hill to change their behavior. I mean, that's generally what I've got to say. I think it's roughly about 10 minutes, hopefully, Sandra.
Yeah. Perfect. Cool. Thank you very much for this introduction. This was great. We will share the link to the blog post you mentioned, and we're capturing notes and some other links in the document as well. So we'll share the link to that too. But for now, we'll continue on with the discussion.